Joining me this week is a mathematician, an economist, and the managing director of Thiel Capital, Eric Weinstein. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, Dave.
Economist, mathematician, managing director. These are big words that I'm throwing at you.
So is imposter.
And imposter. You're not supposed to say that at the beginning.
I got over my imposter syndrome by embracing the imposter quality. And in fact, I learned this from Jim Watson, the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA. And he had this brilliant insight, which was, if you're going to do anything big, you are by definition unqualified to do it. So that just opened up a huge swath of new territory.
Oh man, I may have to change my bio on my website after hearing that. There's so much that I want to talk to you about, and we're going to do it in parts because there's a lot between math and economics, and I want to talk public policy with you and politics and all of that stuff. But let's start with the math thing, because I was never good at math. I was not a math science guy. That's why I bring on people to discuss those things. I was always an English social studies guy. What do you have in your brain that the non-math person doesn't have?
This is a really interesting question, because I also was not good at math.
Really?
Yeah. And I would say that, in fact, somewhere buried in my tweet stream is the claim that if you didn't major in math, you have no idea whether you're good at it or not good. And what I found is that when things got supposedly more advanced, they actually got simpler because mathematicians started revealing what was powering all of the math that you'd previously learned. And so if you're really good at thinking fundamentally, as I think you are and many people who come on this show are particularly gifted at that particular thing, they would find, in my opinion, that higher level math might actually be easier because it's more honest and it's more complete and there are no gaps and nobody's pulling the wool over your eyes.
So when was that moment for you that you went from, I'm not into this or I'm not good at it, to now, oh, now I see this other deeper thing?
I went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and they had a language requirement. I tried taking French, and I found that I had no ability to complete it. So I figured I wouldn't graduate from college. And as a result, I just said, if the language of the universe is written in mathematics, in particular in differential geometry, it would be crazy if I'm not going to be able to graduate from college not to at least learn the language of reality. And so I just took all upper level math classes.
The language of reality, I like that. Is that, do people say that's what math is?
Well, to me, you could hope to read classical Arabic or Hebrew or some ancient language to get closer to creation. But for me, I believe that were there a creator, his book is written, or her book, in the language of differential geometry and its consequences. And so that's the way I approached it. And then I found, quite to my surprise, that I was really good at something that I had never previously been good at.
Yeah. Was there a specific moment? I mean, do you remember sitting there, pen to paper, that you thought, this is it?
Well, there was a terrible course in abstract algebra, which is, algebra always sounds elementary, but it's arbitrarily difficult and interesting.
It sounds elementary depending on who you're talking about.
Of course.
I wasn't. What is that, like our 11th grade? I did not do well.
So this is the algebra, let's say, of symmetry, and I was taking a course, and I was infatuated with a young woman, and I found that I didn't show up to class as much as I should, and I did very poorly on a midterm. And my friend who was taking the class told me that the professor had a problem that if you could solve that problem, you could get an A+ in the class and not have to take the final exam. And since I was bombing, I tried my luck at that, and it yielded.
Wow.
And that was a shock, because I had been a pretty good student to age 10, and then I had a period between 10 and 16 when I went off to college where I was lost because of various learning issues. I was not a standard student. And then this was sort of redemption and regaining this kind of power and ease and love of the beauty of mathematics.
Yeah. Is it tough to sort of view the world through the mathematical prism when we live in a time when that seemingly is so not rewarded, when sort of having facts and knowledge and evidence is not rewarded and your brain operates in that space?
Well, that's a great question. I think that the weird part about it is, of course, that there is this layer underneath this social layer. So we're talking about politics, and we're talking about entertainment and how many clicks and all these things. But if you look at the technology that's supporting all of this, mathematics and completely rigorous thinking is underpinning the infrastructure. And if you're willing to dig a little bit more deeply, I think that what you find is mathematics and rigorous thinking has never been more important. But the problem is that computers and technology have sort of provided us with what I call a half-silvered mirror effect. So if you sit down at a computer, you are no longer usually programming on it. You're just serving up apps and information. But there is a layer underneath or behind this, and that's where people like me are active, providing the very rigorous technical support in order to make the rest of this social reality possible.
So do you weep for the state of math in America right now, just the public state of it?
Oh, I have a totally different impression. I think we are unbelievable.
That's nice to hear.
At science and engineering.
Yeah.
And that what we are actually in is a multi-year, multi-decade conspiracy, effectively, to deny just how good our educational system can be, just how good some of our people are. And this has to do with the economics of staffing the STEM workforce, science and engineering. And so in order to get the money, get the labor, we've had to continually pretend as if Americans are terrible at mathematics, when I think we're actually really good. We have a very heterogeneous K through 12 system, and some schools are terrible, but there are lots of terrific ones. And you know, we have high schools, multiple, Bronx Science, Stuyvesant, Far Rockaway, which is now closed, which have produced multiple Nobel Prize winners, and yet we pretend that we are somehow lagging, we are incapable and incompetent, and it really has to do with labor market issues where scientific employers are always looking to get lower cost labor, and they prefer usually to import talent and effectively poverty from relatively less well-off countries to staff our science and engineering workforce. So I actually think we're doing terrifically well. I think math is in very good shape. I think theoretical physics, has been having a much harder time of it for the last 40-odd years. So I'm pretty happy with mathematics.
That's really interesting. So I never heard of it framed in a labor sense. So you're saying basically that if a kid goes through our school system, is a real genius, great at math, science, et cetera, that the workforce still would look to someone from another country just basically because they could pay them less. Is that?
Well, I think there's a big critique, which is that sometime around 1970, the engines of authentic growth within the American economy and the world economy sort of mysteriously started to sputter. And so if you think about post-war, post-World War II, anything that is built on a growth expectation is going to have the characteristic, for example, a law firm where a partner is going to have several associates under them, under him or her, trying to become partners. So while you're growing, that's possible. But when you hit steady state, every one of these institutions with an embedded growth hypothesis becomes a Ponzi scheme. And so the problem is we absorbed this throughout our country, and the universities function just like that law firm, where one professor is hoping to train 20 future professors over a lifetime.
Right.
And we had about 8% of the country educated post-secondarily after high school before World War II, and then we got up to about 50%. And so that expansion fueled a golden age because you could do all sorts of things with promising people a future while having them contribute their youth into a system. And then when that stopped, between 1970 and 1980, there was a sort of a panic. And then we had to restart as-if growth, fake growth. And you did that by offshoring, you did that by mergers, you did that by playing around with numbers. And so the universities got caught up in that. And that's really the problem, is that we've learned how to play the science and engineering shortage card. There's no such thing as a long-term labor shortage in a market economy because the wage level Like there's no job an American won't do. I will literally clean your bathroom with my toothbrush if the price is
If
right.
the price is right.
Right. So it's the same way I have a Steinway shortage in my apartment because not because there's no Steinways to be had, but because I don't feel like shelling out for the grand piano that I've always dreamed of. And so the same.
Not cheap for a Steinway.
No.
What are we looking at? 25 grand or something?
Must be.
At least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very obvious to me that all of these, now we're talking about sort of social stuff,
Right.
but it's all framed within a mathematical perspective.
Yeah, I sort of, I've been accused of running a social program in emulation, but doing it from a fundamental perspective. That's how I think.
Yeah. Is there any part of your brain that doesn't operate in that way?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which part?
Well, I think that.
Well, like love, for example.
Sure.
Let's go deep. I mean, you're married, you have kids.
Right.
I mean, do you look at the prospect of love and family and all that through some sort of analytical
No. The
mind?
felt sense.
Yeah.
You just feel tingles and shivers, right? And then you can have somebody, like Bob Trivers, who I hope you'll have on the program at some point, actually officiated at my brother's wedding, and he did a beautiful 10-minute story of the evolutionary basis of love, and he did it very respectfully, so that you could see love emerging from the extreme needs for childcare. Mm-hmm. So you can understand love and its origins in what we would call K-selected species, which have to put a huge amount of care into the offspring. However, that's not how it feels to be in love. And so arbitraging between the analytic and the felt sense is part of what it means to lead and examine life. And I think that it's very strange that people expect you to choose.
Yeah, you think people don't do that well? I feel like maybe the choice is the hard part. So people just go to one or the other. So you have a certain amount of people that are just purely driven by the emotion part, and we see a lot of that these days. Or you see a certain amount of people purely driven by the analytical part. I think you see less of them, although obviously plenty of them exist. But that choice is one of the key things there is in life, right?
I think it is, and I think that very often the problem is that we don't accept the compartmentalized mind, that I don't want the space of my mind that marvels at my children to be the part of my mind necessarily that thinks about my need to outcompete the neighbors next door with my genes over there.
Right, these are separate things and should remain separate.
Right, and so that having a partition, I think, is usually really part of sanity. That when the partitions go out, most minds find that the rooms are talking to each other, and you get a lot of sort of crazy interference, and then you have people who are incredible at it. And so our mutual friend Sam Harris, I think, does as good a job of anyone having a decompartmentalized mind, but one which has a sort of grace and humanity about it, and this unfailing analytic consistency. So there are a small number of people who can do that game.
Yeah.
And I'm in a slightly different game.
Right. And for those people, it does make it a little harder to act in the public space, right? Because there's a cavalcade of craziness that they're going to have to deal with.
I think that the problem when you have a mind that doesn't mirror the construction of sort of the default, the neurotypical mind, you always have to have a shim because you're going to say things that are going to be surprising, shocking, and in particular, one of the things I think you and I are both looking at is there is this mania for telling people what they're really thinking, what's really going on behind the eyes and between the ears.
Yeah.
And very often, I don't think people do a great job of modeling these more subtle constructions. And so you just get nonsense. You get all of these accusations. You don't understand what love is. Well, there's this thing called the pre-trans fallacy. Are you actually less informed about love because you're talking about its evolutionary basis, or are you actually more sensitive? And does that heighten and deepen the experience?
Mm-hmm. You think this need to know everything all the time is sort of a new need? It seems like it's been ramped up in the last couple of years, where there's just so many people. And maybe this is just a function of that we're all connected now and constantly on our phones and all that, but just where there's so many people who are constantly, the way religion used to constantly preach that it had the truth, I feel like now it's either politicians or demagogues or just online personalities, just whatever, that just constantly will tell you they know what's going on, really. And it's like, no, you don't. Nobody knows.
Well, this is the whole essence of, do you believe that life is about answers or about struggles? And so, it's funny, we have two people who come from the Rubinchik line, my family, strongest analytic traditions, the Rubinchiks.
Yeah.
And
just to clarify that for people that may not understand, we did a little digging. And it seems like we may have some ancestor possibly somewhere Eastern Europe, somewhere something or other. Maybe, we haven't confirmed it.
Maybe Azerbaijan and Baku, we don't know.
there may be something somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. Coming from the sort of Ashkenazi Eastern European Jewish background, I think that struggle is absolutely baked into the analysis. And whether it's the dialectic, whether it's Talmudic reasoning, but walking around an object from multiple perspectives, because even though you and I are both looking at the same bottle, we're not actually seeing the same object because we have different viewpoints on it. And I think that what you and I talk about a lot is the need to struggle decently and gracefully in public so that people can see the thought process. And some of those thoughts might be somewhat frightening, but they may be counterbalanced by a different thought, which actually attenuates whatever the risk is.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good segue to your boss for just a moment. I'm
Okay.
not going to make you sell him up a river. Don't worry. But you work for Peter Thiel, and he right now is sort of one of the few people in the public space that he went all in with Trump. He gave what I think was a spectacular speech at the RNC and talked about being openly gay and proud, and he got an applause break from these people. I mean, and he's now on Trump's transition team, so obviously supporting Trump. You publicly supported Hillary, I think somewhat begrudgingly. I've heard you talk about it a little bit, but you supported Hillary. That must have been an interesting spot to be in as a public person and an intellectual, really going against your boss's very public decision.
If I can sort of unweave that frame a little bit.
Go nuts, yeah. Fix that for me.
I didn't see Peter as necessarily going all in on Trump. I saw him as seeing novel opportunities, seeing some really great things. I think I saw some really great things in Trump, in Bernie, in Hillary. And I saw very dangerous things, or things that I didn't know how to interpret in all of these candidates. And so I can't speak for Peter, but I think that Peter and I spent almost no time between us in anything testy or unpleasant or awkward. This, for people who don't really know Peter personally, the media portrayal of Peter is just incredible. There's certain topics that attract fake news. Peter Thiel and string theory are two topics.
We're going to get into both of those a little bit more.
But it's remarkable to me that this is a guy who I probably felt that I was 90% aligned with on most every topic. And so I think that part of the problem is that we have this idea of you're a Hillary supporter. Well, I couldn't have been more upset about Hillary as a candidate. And what really scared me about Trump wasn't particularly some of the terrible comments or the sense that he was this incredibly divisive figure, because I actually didn't believe that he was speaking literally. I think that what I saw was that we had built this cognitive prison where it was very difficult to break out of it without somebody calling you a bigot, an idiot, a traitor. Right? There's just this incredible language and this head of steam, so that if you try to think in a way that is not compatible with the New York Times or CNN or Fox even, that you're immediately swatted down as if you're a eugenicist and a Nazi.
Right.
And so that Gordian knot with which we've been tying people, I have been trying to carefully untie, and I've been in a losing battle because the New York Times can tie the knot faster than I can untie it. And so what Trump came through is he just said, well, you tell me how you're going to imprison me, and then you're going to lose that because I'm going to slash it.
Yeah.
And I think that Peter intuited that the worst fears about Trump were probably not going to be realized. What are the odds that a guy who's lived a full life in New York City, is secretly a Klansman. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And so what Trump did was he trolled the hell out of the country, and what we will find out now how much of that was real. But all signs are that he wasn't taking it very seriously.
Right, which that may say something very perverse or painful about the state of the country, but understanding it is a key part of how you move forward, right? Like, I still see people, I think you just laid it out pretty much exactly how I think it is, whether we want it to be or not. And I still see people railing against the same, doing the same things that led us here. So they get outraged over the tweet, and they're still using all the racist language and all the homophobic language and all this. And it's like, I still see people saying, well, Trump's a homophobe. Meanwhile, there's a picture of him and Peter shaking hands at the table during the transition, and Peter speaking at the RNC thing. Or was he secretly a white supremacist living on the Upper East Side of Manhattan all of these years?
But Trump was excited about getting homosexuality normalized. I think that the Republicans
It's a
have been
relief for them,
dying.
right?
Who in 2017 wants to be homophobic? I mean, I have a certain amount of homophobia from having grown up and been hit on while I was, a developing young man. And it turns out that really what you need more dudes kissing so that everything gets normalized.
We can get some dudes in here kissing.
All right.
If it would ease the,
Not before 5, but
it's a little early for that, yeah. So what do we do then? Because I agree with you that there was this sort of, there was this archetype, and Trump said, well, now I'm going to play your game. I'm going to blow it up. It seemed, in retrospect, it seems ridiculous that a year ago most of us thought he probably wasn't going to at least win the Republican nomination, much less the presidency. Because in retrospect, it's like, it now seems so obvious, doesn't it?
Well, I think that we actually did know that he was going to do pretty well. And I think what we have is we have this overlay in our mind which says, if I say that I think he's going to do well, if I recognize that his energy is extreme and everyone else is kind of lackluster and frightened, right? Then I'm going to be in the Ann Coulter position where she gets asked who's going to win, and she says Donald Trump, and she's a laughingstock. So we do this look-ahead function where we pre-compute, if I want to stay in the good graces of my group, I better not say what I'm actually feeling. And I think that's what actually happened. We knew that there was excitement and energy behind Bernie, right? But there wasn't reification because the New York Times, Washington Post weren't reporting on Bernie the way they were reporting on Trump. So Trump was getting a lot of airtime because they thought he'd hang himself if they would just give him enough rope. With Bernie, they thought if we starve him for coverage, the phenomenon will go away. And I think that Peter did this amazing thing at last year's retreat where he put up a photo from Davos with Bono and maybe it was Bill Clinton and somebody dressed in African dress. And he says, look at the globalists and notice how dated this feels. He said, this isn't what this time is about. He said, I could be in Davos and I wanted to be here instead in the US with our team because it's gone from global to local. And so Peter was very in touch with his feelings. And as great of like a chess playing strategic genius as this guy is, he's also emotionally very aware. And he realized that the feel was off, that all of this sort of Clinton Global Initiative stuff feels stale. In fact, if globalism is going to succeed, it's probably going to be built by nationalists because you have to have the support of where people live in order to build it, just the way peace often gets brokered by butchers and not by peaceniks.
Right. You're right. You make peace with usually some pretty bad dudes.
Yeah, if you've got blood on your hands, that's a huge plus, particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah. We could do a little Middle East stuff. But before we get there, so what do we do with all of this? For those of us that have the trepidations about Trump,
right?
That still, I still, even though I think I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can to him, and I think there's incredible opportunity here.
Right.
I don't think he's a white nationalist. I don't think he cares about the gays. I don't think he's going to care about weed. I think he actually might do some reforming of the prison system. I think there's some really good opportunity here to lower taxes, blah, blah, blah. But for those of us for the people that are watching this that are going, well, I don't like the troll game. I don't like this game that's being played. What? How do you, can you? Is there any comfort in there?
Sure. First of all, if you have
Again, this is as someone that voted for Hillary,
yes,
and I'm asking you for the comfort.
well, but I've been predicting. So I looked at a 2011 essay that I wrote on professional wrestling about kayfabe, which is the system of deceptions, and first order, second order, tertiary, quaternary deceptions take place in wrestling. Mm-hmm. Trump is very aware of professional wrestling, not as cheap entertainment, but as deep human psychology. How many layers of deception and self-deception, a lie within a lie, a story, persuasion, et cetera. And this is why somebody like Scott Adams was able to recognize Trump's genius, and Michael Moore was in touch with this. Trump is a next level player. And the problem is that if you're used to thinking that someone is speaking literally to you, which I think in general most of us would be shocked at how little speech is actually literal.
Yeah. Even Obama, right? I mean,
sure. I mean, my son and I were driving to his school, and Obama was talking about gun control. My son didn't recognize the voice. He said, "I don't know who this is, but I hate him." And I said, "Really? That's a very strong emotion. What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I don't disagree with what he's saying." He says, "But I can't stand how coercive his language is. He's pushing me to the conclusions that I would have come to naturally. And I find this false, and can you please turn it off?" And then my son went into this huge impression of Obama, which was spot on.
How interesting. How old is your son?
11.
Wow, that's wild. You know, it's interesting because I saw a little of that very early on with Obama, that he used the word notion a lot whenever he was describing his opponent's ideas. The notion that the notion that the economy could work this way, or the notion. And I always thought it was such an interesting wordplay, because when you say that something's just a notion, you're basically saying that ridiculous thing that person keeps saying. So it's like it's not allowing you to come to your conclusion, it's tipping you off before you've even gotten to where you're supposed to be.
And I love the study of language and shading. So you have this content layer. At the moment, we're in this crazy narrative over fake news, where fake news is supposed to be limited to things that are just made up and untrue. But the problem is they've opened this Pandora's box, which is how many different ways does their news manipulate us into thinking something that isn't true, or shading our feelings or emotions, or presenting us some sort of fait accompli and not giving us any ability to get out of the deal. Yeah. And that's what's fascinating to me, is that it's backfiring. And now you even have the New York Times writing about, can you believe it, conservative media is calling us fake news. And the point is, well, you correctly identified that you do fact check, but that is not sufficient. You cannot fact check your way to real news. Yeah. And so I think that we're going to get a lot of people a lot more sophisticated about neurolinguistic programming, about systems of deception, about non-literal speech. And what I'm hoping this is going to converge on is an understanding that you cannot expect the truth from your government. What you can expect is what I call adult-level fiction. And adult-level fiction is an ability to check that somebody who's supposedly acting on your behalf is in fact acting on your behalf, even if they're not able to tell you the truth. So I don't want the CIA or the NSA to be an open book and say, here's all the stuff that we're doing, because that's not right.
Right.
But I do need to know that my government isn't using its ability to access my phone calls to store them and then target me if one administration doesn't like my political viewpoint. Right? So the key question isn't why is our government lying to us? The government has to lie to us. But the government should be lying to us in a way that a smart person can say, okay, I understand that I can't know what's going on, but it's not hostile to me. It is consonant with our values. And that's what we're missing. We're being given, Hillary was just serving up this childlike fiction. I was just thinking, nobody can possibly believe this. You have the Pulse nightclub shooting, and people are talking about gun control.
Yeah.
No me consenso.